like to go annoy other people?
Like who?
Wander around, tell them we're going to do a science talk at 7 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
If they ask you to the place, you say, here's your time.
Okay.
Estimate expected rate of duration will be like 5.
thumbs up. Sounds great. Is this actually the slide deck I need? Oh my god, look at that. Hi everyone. I'm Amy. Lex. Olivia, nice to meet you guys. I feel like we should do this now. I'm Amy Sharma. I'm the Executive Director of Science for Georgia. Super excited to have y'all here tonight. Thanks for being here. Science for Georgia is an organization that exists to get science out of the lab and onto the streets. So we have 3 main activities: science communication training, science outreach events for adults. So thanks for being adults and coming to our outreach event. I really appreciate that. And then we do go down to the Georgia General Assembly and advocate for the responsible use of science in public policy. So we're doing a really good job there, but we're gonna do better. Do you have a question? No? Okay, just livening things up. But I am really excited about this because our topic tonight is water wars, and water is becoming even more precious and fought over in Georgia, so it's fun to kind of really dig into the history of how we got here. I didn't move to Georgia until like 2014, but I know there's like a long history of fighting with neighboring states over water, and like whenever I'm talking about advocacy with my water friends, they always bring up this like long history. So, yay, we're learning new things! Yay.
Yeah.
All right, so our speaker tonight is John Clarke. He is a retired assistant director, USGS Georgia Water Science Center. He was a hydrologist. I'm sorry. We're gonna get there. This should be bigger. He is a hydrologist. You don't just stop being a hydrologist when you retire. He was the assistant director for hydraulic investigations. He authored more than 50 papers on Georgia groundwater.
Wow.
I know, twice served as president of the Georgia Groundwater Association. He studied the potential for off-site migration of contaminants at the U.S. Department of Energy's Savannah River site. Kind of really cool. Development of the hydraulic overview of Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories. I know, right? And he designed and implemented the Georgia Coastal Sound Science Initiative. So this is really awesome. John's a rock star. Yes.
I would have put that in the actual minute, all the accolades.
Yeah, I know. I should have put this like at the top. We're learning new things.
It's in the bio.
I know, but no one reads the bio. That was like 3 paragraphs down. Next time we're gonna be like rock star. Yeah, all right. Thanks for that. But I am like honored to bring John to the stage. Take it away, John.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you very much. Is that coming through loud and clear? Good?
I can't hear.
Okay. Pleasure to be here today. I'm going to talk to you about the water wars that Georgia has been involved in with our neighbors, basically, but also internally. We have wars amongst ourselves. This is going to focus mostly on Metro Atlanta. We're going to talk all about, what's the water competition here for with the other states and amongst ourselves. What are some of the water quality issues, and what's the outlook for the future? So this is the topic, Georgia's water wars. So you'll see you see the state flags for Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, and you'll notice that there's some cannons involved in this shot. And this is actually a real photo from the Savannah area. That's the Savannah waterfront there. And those cannons are pointed towards South Carolina. And so I always loved this photo because that was back when I was working on the Coastal Sound Science Initiative, which is about an issue that related to the saltwater intrusion at Hilton Head. And it just so happened I was there a day where they're doing these maneuvers there, these shooting the cannons off, and I said, this is perfect. So I took a picture because that's another water where we were fighting over groundwater between South Carolina and Georgia. So this happened to be a perfect timing. So water, most precious resource, lifeblood of our planet. And for millennia, there's been conflicts and competitions for its use. And I actually taught a course called Water Wars that covered the entire planet. It talked about the history of it. It talked about the Middle East, the Western U.S., and other places throughout the world. And then, of course, here in Georgia. That's just a large well. That's a well that's down in Brunswick, Georgia, that can pump over 11,000 gallons a minute. So, water wars. Here's some expressions. First is, on the left there is water flows toward money. Okay? So we know Las Vegas, right? That's where all the money is. And by God, somehow they developed a place that could get water in the middle of the desert. And they have Hoover Dam there, and there's all sorts of issues related there for water wars. Then Mark Twain in the middle there. Whiskey's for drinking, water is for fighting over. Okay? And then that bottom one is disputing water rights, a Western pastime. So it all begins with the water cycle, and of course that starts with rainfall, precipitation, snow coming out of the sky, falls on the ground. Some of it's lost to evaporation. Some of it seeps into the ground and becomes groundwater. And then some flows off the land surface and becomes the rivers and streams. So if we look at Earth's water, most of the water on the Earth is salt water. Okay, with only 3% of the water on Earth is fresh water. So it is truly a precious resource. Of the fresh water, most of it is trapped in ice caps and glaciers. Okay, that's all the fresh water. But about 30% of it is in groundwater. So, and then surface water is only 1.2%. So it's much more plentiful underground. So per capita water use, what's that? That's basically the amount of usage per person. Okay? And as you might expect, the poorer countries of the world use very little per person. I was just in Uganda a few weeks ago, and I can testify to this. I saw these little kids going out just like this with their water jugs to the community spring, and they would fill that jug up and carry it back to the house, however long of a walk that was. So they weren't going in and taking, 20-minute showers and things like that. So at the other end of the spectrum, we have us, of course, who is the biggest users, the U.S., 150 gallons per day, per person. So we are, the pigs, if you want to call us that. And you have giant communities with pools. That's actually Tony Soprano there. Okay, so what are the issues in Metro Atlantic? You have competition for the available supply, and there are required minimum flows that you must keep in the streams. That's monitored by stream flow gauging, which is what the USGS, the folks that I used to work for, do. They monitor what the flows are in the rivers. Another issue here is related to that is the water's needed to flush the sewage out. The solution to pollution is dilution, right? So if you don't have that, then you've got a mess, basically. You have to worry about what the downstream users' needs are. And of course, all this led to the interstate water war that we're having, or we've had, between Florida and Alabama. Okay, and then and then projecting into the future, there is a shortfall of available water going into the future. We'll talk all about that. And then finally in Atlanta, big issue is sewage spills. Okay, where water from sewers that are way outdated from the, that were built in the 1800s cannot handle the load of a modern city with 5+ million people sitting on top of it. So Atlanta's setting. So we're located on the eastern continental divide, which is an upland area, basically a ridge, that's favorable for transportation such as roads and railroads. It was part of a trail system used by Native Americans. So they would walk along the ridge through here. And that ridge goes all the way up into the mountains up to north. It's the headwaters of 5 major rivers. So you have off this divide, some of the water flows toward the Gulf of Mexico, and I've been waiting to say that for a long time. And then the other part flows to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so so it's headwaters of these 5 major rivers. In 1837, the location marked the spot where the Western Atlantic Railroad terminated and got the name Terminus. That was its original name. So in this area, because you have all these different rivers that are heading up in Atlanta, you have basically 5 different water basins that are right next to each other. And what happens there is that we have what's called an interbasin transfer. That's where the water is maybe pumped out of one river, and then when they put it, they do their it becomes sewage. Then where do they pump it? They pump it to another river. So that happens where they're showing here the Chattahoochee River. You've got water flowing out, quite a bit actually. Okay, but you have some coming back in. The Flint River, that's coming and going. So if you look at the net flow, if you take all the water that's coming in and subtract the water that's going out, there's a net outflow of 99 million gallons a day. So the river is losing water to the other basins that are in the area. So to deal with all this interbasin stuff, the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District was established back in 2001. And they are staffed by the Atlanta Regional Commission personnel. And basically, they're one of the most comprehensive water management programs in the U.S. They've developed very proactive developing water plans and managing water and educating the public. They're very, they do a great job. So this tri-state waterworks, we have 2 major basins. We have the Alabama-Coosa-Tallapoosa, which is this area here. And then you have the Appalachia-Chattahoochee-Flint, Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint, which is this green area. And this is the one that's been really in the news. This is the one where the most contentious issues have come up. And that's what most of this talk is going to talk about. But it's been over 2 decades of litigation between Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. And that's Clarence Darrow there. It hasn't been quite that long, but the lawyer? Clarence Darrow, the Stokes monkey trial back in the 1920s, I guess it was. Yeah.
There was one that defended the Lowe brothers. Is that him? Clarence Darrow?
And where?
Well, he was a famous lawyer that defended like reprehensible people, like the Lowe brothers, I think.
No, this isn't the guy.
Oh, no.
So the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint, we call it the ACF basin. ACF. And it covers over 19,600 square miles in Alabama, Florida, Georgia. Most of it's in Georgia. 74% of that water basin is in Georgia. And it supplies over 60% of the drinking water for Georgia and lesser amounts in Alabama and Florida. Interesting thing about this is, so you have this humongous basin, but most of the water is in this place right up here. Anybody know what that is?
Lake Lanier?
Lake Lanier. That's it. So here we are. This is the end of the basin here. So look at this small area that the water, when the rainfall hits the ground, it has to drain into Lake Lanier. So that's only 6% of the total basin size. But this provides over 62% of the entire water in the basin. It's provided by this lake. So, so there's an intense competition for this water between the various states. We'll tell you a little bit more about Lake Lanier. So it was completed in 1956 when they made Buford Dam. Its principal purpose was for flood control and power generation. But it also was used for recreation, water supply, navigation, and fish and wildlife management. It's over 7 0.5 million visitors a year. We already talked about the amount of storage that it provides for the whole ACF basin, but it only covers 6% of the basin. It has a maximum depth of 160 feet. So, with this, knowing this, what's happened here is why it has so much water in it is it's so deep. 160 feet is pretty deep, and so it can hold a lot of water. And plus, it's being fed by, even as though it's a small area, only 6% of the total basin, it's the area of the heaviest rainfall in the state. So you get tons of rainfall, and it drains off and goes into the lake. Yes?
How did they figure out that that was the heaviest rainfall?
How did they figure out what?
If this was the heaviest rainfall.
Well, just because there's rain gauges all over, and they make maps out of that, and they know where it's happening. So.
And so this is where they ended up, creating Lake Lanier.
Yeah. So. All right. So now I'm going to just go through. This is sort of a sequence of slides, just showing you how much water is being used in the basin. So this is nothing, but okay. Thermoelectric power. Okay. So that's your, the coal burning plants, for example. But we also have nuclear in Alabama. There's a plant. See, this plant is in Alabama. All the others are coal-fired plants or gas modified plants. Hydroelectric power. There's a couple of reservoirs within the basin that generate electricity that way. Navigation. So that's where you got to keep the channel at a certain depth so that the barges can carry up supplies or bring, crops or whatever they're carrying in the basin. Recreational boating throughout, of course, Lake Lanier, a bunch of that. Commercial fishing, that's basically down here, the Apalachicola Bay, where the oysters are. Okay, that's really the bone of contention with Florida. It's all based on those oysters. Recreational fishing throughout the basin. Industry. So industry is pretty prevalent throughout the basin. Endangered species. Now this is basically mussels. They have all sorts of mussel species that are endangered. And what happens is when the land goes dry because of the river's been pumped or during drought conditions, the mussels will die. They don't have their habitat. And then there's irrigation, which is throughout, mostly in the Flint River basin. And that's mostly groundwater. And groundwater interacts with surface water, so it affects the stream flows. So I can show you that. Public supply, that's mostly up in Metro Atlanta. But you can see it's scattered throughout. Comes down south, even down to Columbus. Sewage disposal. So this is where, after the water's used, it's put back into the river after they clean it up. So that's through mostly in this Atlanta area. So I mentioned flow requirements. So this is mandated by the EPD, where they have certain requirements. So up here in Atlanta, this is Metro Atlanta, they must maintain a flow of 750 cubic feet per second to dilute the wastewater that's put back into the river. And cubic foot of water is about the amount of water held in a basketball. So that's like 750 basketballs floating per second through an area. Further downriver, we have power plant cooling. So this is a coal-fired plant, and they want to cool the water when it's put back in after it's heated up. Then we have this is Lake Seminole down the southern part of the state, and it needs this amount of flow for a variety of reasons. And then another power plant downstream of that lake. So at Atlanta, so you have this minimum flow of 750 cubic feet per second. And this is immediately upstream of Peachtree Creek. This is monitored by the USGS stream gauge. So that's a very critical thing. It's used for legal purposes and all that data from that place. Let's see, that flow standard was in place since the 70s to make sure that you have enough water coming in there to flush the sewage out. So this all happened. So here we are in Lake Lanier. We begin up here. We have water coming out for water supply. different areas, but actually some sewage goes back in that lake. They clean it and they put it back in. When it comes downstream, you got Atlanta takes its water out, the cab takes its out, but they also put back some sewage. Okay, over here, Cobb, Marietta, Water Authority takes water out. But here's where all this, where that flow requirement takes place. So we're down here. Here's the USGS stream gauge, making sure it's 750 CFS. But then Atlanta takes its water out, and then right downstream is where it goes right back in. So it's kind of amazing. You're getting your drinking water, and then right immediately you're putting that back sewage in, like within very small distance, really. What's that?
Sounds different.
Oh, yeah. So moving on down, this is the nuclear power plant in Alabama that was put in 1970, and then another unit was put in 77. Supplied over 20% of the electricity to Alabama, and it's got a 2,000 CFS, 2,000 basketball per second requirement. Lake Seminole, completed in 1957 with the Woodruff Lock and Dam. It does flood control, hydroelectric power, navigation, fish and wildlife, and general recreation. It's only 6% of the basin storage, as opposed to Lanier, which is like 62%. And then it has a minimum flow requirement that's variable, because it's based on an operational plan that the Corps of Engineers has that says, well, if it's this condition outside, we have to protect the animals, let's say, or we need to control for the flooding and things like that. So it's based on a variety of parameters, and the Corps of Engineers monitors that. Moving downstream from Lake Seminole, we go to the next coal-fired plant that was opened in 1953, and it's got a 4,000 CFS requirement, which is needed to, of course, cool the water off, but also to maintain the depth so that they can suck the water out to use in the plant. So it has to be a certain depth so that the pipes will go under that level. And then finally, the Apalachicola Bay, which is the largest oyster fishery in the southeast, with over $134 million annually. So storage from Lake Lanier, it's important for maintaining the flow requirements, and it's very strictly monitored. It's monitored again by a USGS gauge, which instead of measuring the stream flow, measures the height of the reservoir, how deep is the water. So these are some of the critical elevations in that lake. So if the water levels were to drop below 1,071 feet, you would start having problems with recreational effects. People's docks are going to go dry, the beaches are going to go away, and it's going to be just not a pleasant place to play in. Power generation will begin to fall off at 1,035 feet elevation. Water supply will have issues if it gets below 1,025, and then there'll be no power generation at all if you get to 1,020, because you're getting below their intakes for the turbines. The lowest elevation recorded was 1050 in December of 2007 during severe drought. So that's falling in this area, below the recreation issue and above the power generation problem. And that's just looking at what the lake looked like at that time period, how dry it got. Pretty ugly looking. Just all these little fingerling inlets were just dried up. And, you can imagine what real estate values were like then, all throughout here. So flows into Florida. So Lake Seminole here is where the Chattahoochee and the Flint River come together. And then there's a dam here, the Woodruff Dam, and it forms this reservoir. And then the flow out of there goes into the Apalachicola River. So the ACF, okay, Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint. So groundwater in this area has a pronounced interaction with the rivers. So if you pump from wells, you may be impacting the stream flow. And that also impacts what goes on with those mussels. If heavy pumping can lower the levels, and then they get dry land and they die. Some of the water in Lake Seminole flows into the aquifer through caverns in the limestone. So this is the flows into Lake Seminole. So about 34% comes from the Flint River, 47 from the Chattahoochee, about 18 from the groundwater. And then flowing out of it, most of it's coming right through the dam. But you also have some groundwater seeping out. You lose some from evaporation. And then this is just sort of a fudge factor with it. It's like in the water budget, it's the plus or minus basically on all these other parameters. So this is just looking at some interesting photos. So here's when they were constructing Lake Seminole, they came across these giant caverns. And the dam, I mean, they pumped like millions of tons of grout into that to fix that. So if you had a business to invest in back in 1954, it should have been the cement business down near Lake Seminole. This is actually was taken in modern day, and it's still leaking. This is a whirlpool happening in the lake, so that where the water is seeping out and going into the ground. So this is showing the irrigation down there. This is the biggest area of irrigation in the state, and you've probably, when you've flown around, you've seen these circular patterns on the ground. That's where they have these center pivot irrigation systems that they use that well supply this. And here's your Lake Seminole, and then this is the Flint River Basin and the Chattahoochee here. So a lot of pumping going on down here. So the interaction of groundwater and surface water. Under unstressed conditions and natural conditions, the water, the rainfall enters the aquifer and then flows laterally and then discharges into the stream. Okay, but then when you put a well in, that intercepts some of that flow and actually might even start pulling it out of the river if it's severe enough. So here you're intercepting, reducing the amount getting in the stream, and here you are where you've actually reversed the flow and you're pulling the water from the stream to the well. So where does the pumping most affect the stream flow? And intuitively, you would say the closer you are to the stream, the more it's going to go. Well, that's true. And then this groundwater model was used to actually delineate where it's most sensitive to that. So the red areas, the hot colors, show where if you put a well in there, you're going to definitely, or you have a good probability of impacting the stream flow. And the results of this were used to guide ag withdrawal permit decisions by the EPD. And then for a while there was a total moratorium down here. They didn't let you put any wells in at all. So, where are we going? Okay. So, talking about the legal issues, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to get into all the nuances of this, but I just sort of give you a general broad brush. So 2 decades they've been fighting over water in this area, and a lot of lawyers have been getting rich, okay, very rich. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent on just litigation. Basically, it's focused on legal challenges to the Corps' management of the reservoirs, both the ACF and the ACT. In addition, there was a direct challenge by Florida that went to the Supreme Court regarding how Georgia uses the water, and we'll get into that. So, okay. So the ACT, the Alabama-Coosa-Tallapoosa. Okay. In 1980, Metro Atlanta was looking to get additional water supplies from Lake Allatoona. And that dragged on for about 10 years. They kept asking for it, but the Corps wouldn't do anything. But then Alabama got concerned and sued the Corps to block any action on increasing the withdrawal from Lake Allatoona by Georgia. So they actually sued the Corps on that. So that kept going on for years and years. And then finally, in 2021, after a reallocation study and an environmental impact statement, the Corps granted Metro Atlanta's request for taking more water out of Allatoona. One of the key decisions, part of the decision was that they allowed for the pumping back of effluent back into the lake. So they would allow that water to go back in the lake, and then they could claim that as part of the storage of the reservoir. So that was a big issue there. They weren't going to let them do that. And so the ACF, which we've been talking about most of the talk, Florida sued Georgia back in 2014. They wanted the water to be equally apportioned between the states, and they wanted to lock Georgia at 1992 pumping levels, which I showed you those cannons earlier. I think the cannons might have come out if that actually happened, because I mean that's just you'd have to be basically removing people from the area. You just could not support the population here if you did that. In 2021, the Supreme Court denied Florida's request and dismissed the complaint. They said they did not do an adequate job of presenting why Georgia should not be allowed to have that water. And also they didn't do a sufficient job of proving that Georgia took water out and that affected the oyster industry. Because they blamed Georgia for taking too much water, and then the flows into the Apalachicola Bay were reduced, which then increased the salinity and then made it a bad habitat for the oysters and cut back on the yields from there. So in March of 2017, the Corps adopted a master water control plan that was an environmental impact statement that incorporated all these things they've learned over the 20 years of fooling around with this issue. And it basically explains how the water will be apportioned throughout the basin. There was another suit was filed to challenge the operation manual, and the U.S. court in Georgia found in favor of the Corps, but they're still appealing that decision. So now we shift over away from water quantity to water quality. And sewers are a big issue in Metro Atlanta. It's both in the city and also in DeKalb County. So it's where water it cannot be properly treated, and it backs up, and then it comes out just raw and untreated. And that's what you're seeing here. I guess you've seen these when you go on little hikes. You go see those little elevated sewer manholes. And the reason they're elevated is that they're trying to keep the pressure head above land surface so that the water can't get out. But here's where the pressure head is, because there's so much water it overwhelmed the piping and just had to come out. But that's why they raise them up like that, is so that they have a high enough head so that the water will not get out. And of course, these are contain all sorts of nasty things. E. coli being a major part of that. And again, it's an issue both in Atlanta and in DeKalb. So in DeKalb County, and I happen to be a technical advisor to the Citizens Committee that is advising DeKalb County on the whole sewage issue. So I've been involved in this for maybe 5 or 6 years now. So reasons for sewer spills in DeKalb County: aging and inadequate infrastructure. The pipes are old. Fat soils and grease, otherwise known as fog, which could clog up the pipes. Heavy rain and inflow and infiltration, cracks in the pipe, other ways that the groundwater could get into the pipes. Improper disposal of waste, such as people putting wet wipes, paper towels, feminine hygiene products. They claim that they're disposable wet wipes, but they're not. So they always, that's one of the big things, they try to educate people, saying, don't believe it, it's not true, don't put disposable wet wipes down your toilet. And then of course there's tree roots that can grow in and block and crack the sewer lines. So just looking at some of these things, we have roots coming in here, getting into the pipes, cracking through, finding gaps in the pipes, and then getting into the pipe. Having the cracks in the pipe, and that's where the root will find that. You can have uncapped things like, you could have I was amazed at this. They actually said that they went through and were trying to seal all, you know, the holes in the top of the manhole that they use to take the pry bar to get the thing off. They said that that actually can contribute a lot of water to into the sewage system. So they actually were going around and covering those holes up so that they would not let water in. And of course, you know, the cracked pipes and so forth. So fog, it's basically the hardening of the sewer's arteries. Okay. It enters the plumbing system through garbage disposal sinks and toilets, and it can just plug the whole thing up. Well, of course, you can imagine that if a restaurant doesn't do their job and put it in the thing, that could be devastating. So they actually, you know, they're under regulation. They have to dispose of their grease, and they have those. You've been behind a restaurant, kind of nasty back there, but they have the bins to put the grease in. Yeah, and that's because of this. So the timeline of sewer problems in DeKalb. So there was a major spill back in 2006, and that led to the EPA opened EPA's eyes, and they said, what's going on here? And by
10 million gallons
by 2010, EPA and the Georgia EPD actually filed a civil complaint, and it resulted in the consent decree. Anybody heard about that? The consent, yeah.
Yes.
The consent decree, which is basically they said they must do certain things to avoid being fined. It was finalized in 2011. They had to upgrade the system and pay a $500,000 civil penalty. And this is what I've been watching as I've gone to these meetings. I've been seeing what they've been doing about it. So in 2017, a record sewage spill occurred down in Snapfinger Creek, south of town. And then another one, 9.2 million gallon in 2020. And it was just because the plant was overwhelmed by heavy rains. And I can tell you from what I've seen, the rains are the worst problem. That's the biggest problem for how these sewers have issues. So 2025, the Department of Justice noted that they were concerned that DeKalb wasn't going to meet their 2027 deadline. The consent decree was just modified and kept under higher scrutiny. So now it's in a race against time to complete the necessary upgrades by the 2027 deadline. That's what this Citizens Oversight Committee is involved in. We're trying to keep it up, you know, hold the fire to their feet a little bit and make sure that they're moving forward with that. Yes?
Yeah. Actually, the CAB just raised their rates for water now to help pay for this.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, yeah, the sewer rates in DeKalb County are insane. It's all, I mean, sorry, it's a water rate, but it's really water and sewer, and you're paying for this is what you're paying for. You know, the water supply is nothing. It's this is what costs the money. So Atlanta's sewers. Okay, so they were built at the beginning of the 19th century. Some areas, they combine stormwater and household waste. So that's a very big issue. We'll talk more about that. 1930s, new sewer systems were built, but the system still struggled to keep up with the city's explosive growth and increased paved surfaces, which increases the amount of storm water going into the sewers. 70s, the system became severely overloaded. Raw sewage spills were happening. 95, the Chattahoochee River caper. You guys might know, you probably have had, I don't know if you've had Sally Bethay come in here and talk to y'all, but she's, you know, that was her thing. And she was in the middle of all that. So they filed a federal lawsuit for violating the Clean Water Act. And then the court ruled in their favor and said the city was liable. And a consent decree was issued, which required Atlanta to implement a comprehensive plan to overhaul its sewer system. And I know working at USGS, we were involved in this in that we monitored the stream water quality, which is a way of measuring how well the modifications have done for it. So combined sewer overflows. This is where both your sanitary sewers and your storm water goes to the same place. So you have here's your sanitary sewer. Okay, it goes to the treatment plant, but they also have drains coming in. The storm drains from the street, from the roofs, whatever, would be put in the same pipe. So you can imagine during a big rainstorm how that would overwhelm the system, and when that happens, you get an overflow, and they just dump the raw sewage out. It goes right into the creek. So, to give you an example of CSOs and their effect on water quality, so a tale of two cities, Paris and Copenhagen. So Paris, if you remember the Olympics over the summer, the River Seine was used for the opening ceremony and for the triathlon and marathon swimming events, as these guys are jumping in here. The city has operated under a combined sewer system since the 1830s, back in the days of the Phantom. And despite the major infrastructure changes that they tried to do before the Olympics, concerns about the river's quality, particularly E. coli after rainfall, led to some events being postponed, and actually some athletes got ill. On the other hand, Copenhagen, and I've been to Copenhagen. This is in '95. They were sort of a similar situation. They had combined sewers, and they had 93 places where they knew of where raw sewage was going directly into the Copenhagen harbor and adjacent areas. But they invested heavily in the fixing their sewer system and treatment. They improved the quality because they were able to take that water and store it in an area where they could hold it until they were able to treat it. And we are doing something like that here. I'll tell you about in a minute. So today, Copenhagen has excellent water quality. And I was here. This is the hotel I stayed at. And these are all people that are like just sunbathing and swimming in the lake. So they have like in the harbor. So here's like a little fenced off area where they can go in. There's little places they can go off. There's diving places. And this is it. This is their recreational place in the middle of a major city. And I can tell you Oslo's like that also. So it's very, very interesting. But anyway, this is the hope that we could get to this point. So you have these sewage relief tunnels. And so basically they're put in not to transport water, they're just put in order to hold the water. They have these things that are probably 20-foot diameter boring devices that go in and they ream these tunnels. And I'll show you the ones we have here, how big they are. But they go in, and then when you have a big storm event, the overflow, instead of going in the rivers, they dump them into these tunnels. And then the sewage treatment plant can treat it, in a more timely manner. They don't have to do it immediately. They can't handle the amount of flow that they're getting hit with. So they have to, do it slowly. So here we are in Atlanta. So this is one of the tunnels that's being drilled here. You can see how big the diameter is. This is a machine here that bores through it. Okay? It's kind of like a dune worm going through and boring through the ground. So this shows you how big these things are. The West Area Tunnel, the biggest storage, 177 million gallons it can store. It goes over 8 miles. Trenchman Creek, 1.8 miles, somewhat less storage. Nancy Creek, 8 miles, and the exact storage is not known because it's combined with the West Area Tunnel, so they're not sure how much of this contributes to it. And then the South River Tunnel, 1.7 miles, 10 million gallon storage. So these actually, they've shown that they've actually helped the situation some. So, that's leaving water quality. Now we're moving to the future and how to meet the future needs for Metro Atlanta. So, and this is the slide we were having to reload a lot. But this is basically the projected population growth for the 15 counties surrounding Atlanta. See, we're like about 5.5 or so now, and by 2050 we'll be up like almost 8. So, you know, take your per capita 150 per person amount, and you can do some projections. And this is what the water use is projected to be, the growth of that, from about 580 today, let's say, and going up to 899 by 2050. So, one thing, as I was preparing this talk, well, I wasn't really familiar with this, but how much water that data centers use. And I'll give you my spiel here, but actually I'll tell you what, you guys have a better spiel about this than I have, that Amy put together. And but it's basically due to the cooling demands of the servers. And they use a ton of water. So they're projecting that a place down in Coweta County, it's probably going to need about 6 million gallons of water a day to cool off those servers. And the problem with this is, you know, we're right in the middle of this area, which is the water war, the interstate water war. So if we have all these data centers come up in here, this is all the Chattahoochee basin here, or the ACF. Well, you start adding that much water use, what's that going to do to the flows downstream? Are you going to raise the hornet's nest again? You get Florida and Alabama all upset because of what's going on up here. So that's a caution and warning for doing this. And this is just projecting future electrical demand, but you figure there's a correlation between that and what the water usage would be. So you can see how that grows over the years significantly for these data centers. So how do we get more water for Atlanta? Well, there's water conservation, and actually we've been pretty successful with that. I'll tell you about these toilets in a second. And then interbasin water transfer from the Tennessee River, is that a possibility? So let's go back to our household water use. You know, of the 150 gallons per person a day we use, most of it's from the toilet. 26.7%, with lesser amounts for washers and shower, faucet, but the toilet's the biggest. So they established a toilet rebate program, and I actually took advantage of it. I don't know if anybody else did, but you get free toilet. If you live in Metro Atlanta, you can get a free toilet because it's going to be a low flow toilet to replace what you have. So you go to Home Depot and you fill out a form and you'll get reimbursed for it. So it was established in the mid-2000s. The Metro North Georgia Water Planning District administers this, guides the other utilities. The old toilets used to use about 3.5 gallons per flush, but these more modern models, 1.28 and even 1.1 gallons per flush. So how much does that save? So far they've replaced about 150,000 toilets, and that saves at least 2.4 million gallons per day and 900 million gallons per year. And it's like a 48% change by switching from the old to the new. 48% more efficient. So another solution, I'm not sure how viable this is, but they've talked about grabbing the water from the Tennessee River. And the Tennessee River is a monster river compared to the Chattahoochee. It's a very big river. And it's only 2.5 miles away from the northern border of Georgia, near Chattanooga. That water would have to be piped over 100 miles. And that may sound like a lot, but think about places like, you know, Las Vegas and all these places out west, Phoenix and all that. I know how far they pump. Los Angeles, how far they pump water to get. You know all these things. We have a guest here from Los Angeles. He knows all about this stuff. So, yeah. You're probably surprised that we have these problems here.
Very. I have a lot of questions.
So this is just comparing the flow characteristics on the two rivers. So average flow of Tennessee River, 24 billion gallons daily. Only 1.6 billion gallons from the Chattahoochee. Pretty amazing. So one solution that was proposed a few years ago was to actually move the state border because it's claimed that a surveyor, I don't know if he was a drunk surveyor or what, but he didn't put the right state water line on. So it's supposed to be following the 35th parallel, longitude 35 degrees, but he surveyed it wrong, and it's in the wrong location. So Georgia wants to shift that border so they can actually touch the river. So if they shifted it to that 35 degree, they'd actually be touching the Tennessee River. Georgia actually passed a resolution and established a House committee. And I just found out that in this period of madness in politics, they've actually re-upped that committee. So now Tennessee, they kind of laugh it off. They don't believe that we're serious. And of course, I contend if this ever happened, the cannons would come out.
That's why the cannons are there.
So, just to summarize, Metro Atlanta faces a variety of surface water issues, including competition for supply, minimum flow requirements, and sewage spills. Lake Lanier provides most of the basin storage, but only covers a small part of the basin. And water from Lake Lanier is used to control needs downstream from it. They've been the ACF-ACT have been focused of 2 decades of litigation between Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. Right now, Georgia has won the Supreme Court case, and they are happy as can be about that. But there's still some things in court, some things related to the water control manuals. We talked about the sewage overflow. There are consent decrees on both Cab and Atlanta to make sure that they are working to improve the sewer system so that they're not contaminating the rivers and creeks. And one of the major ways they do that is through combined sewer overflow relief tunnels. Of course, Metro Atlanta's growing population is driving increased need for water. And data centers are going to be a factor that is going to be a big player in this. And potential solutions include water conservation, which is actually, I can tell you, the water conservation actually influenced the court in their decision about not finding for Georgia rather than Florida. They felt that Georgia was very proactive in trying to reduce their usage by virtue of that toilet rebate program, and that had an impact on what their decision was. And of course, the moving the Tennessee state boundary. So that's this story now, and I'll just close it with: if I come back, if you get more people, I'll come back and do the groundwater conflict in Georgia, which is saltwater intrusion along the coast. The Savannah River site, the contaminants, worry about those contaminants coming into Georgia, and then the agricultural pumping effects on the stream flow down in the southwest, and then the Okefenokee swamp issue with the mining down there. So, thank you, and any questions?
Any questions for John?
You got it?
What moves okay, I'm from LA, right? And DeKalb to me County is almost like Beverly Hills. So I hear about all these water problems there, sewage and everything. It's kind of shocking, despite it being old infrastructure. Why are the problems persistent despite having just the second consent decree?
Yeah, well, there's one for land. Well, yeah, the modified land. Yeah.
There's one in 96 and one in 2006. Yeah. Why is DeKalb so bad? Just DeKalb. Why are they not? Why are they under?
Well, it's a question. I think it's part of it's like out of sight, out of mind. So it's been underground. People are really not complaining about it. But once you got once the problem came, it was overwhelming. And, think about the other thing about Atlanta. If you had to replace all these pipes and everything, and you've got the city built on top of there, the kind of work that would be to go and excavate and try to get underground to dig up those pipes and replace them, how many billions of dollars that would cost to do that. So it's been a problem. borders, then we would
Yeah.
have a right to. But
That
they'll never
was
agree to that
crazy.
either. Like I said, cannons will come out.
Yeah.
Or a lot of class.
Have you ever seen a state redraw their borders to steal water? I mean, clean water.
I've never had, but you know, you talk about out west. I mean, that's crazy out there. I mean, you have like California taking all that water from the Colorado River in Arizona and pumping it hundreds of miles to get in there. It's crazy out there. These water waters are nothing compared to what out west. That is insane. You've got like all different. You have the tribal interests. You have Mexico involved in that, and it's very crazy. And you know, and again, it's a water flows toward money because like L.A., California had money. They were able to put these things in back in the 1930s, whenever the heck they did it, and then they pumped that water over there. So there's sort of a grandfathered issue there.
At least with the Colorado River, California, the federal government came in to try to start forcing the issue of them all using this water. California, because they could afford it because they can get water in other areas, said, okay, sure, and voluntarily lowered their draw, forcing the other smaller states to have to do something because they were trying to fight it all together. But now the federal government gives them pressure.
Yeah. You know that the Colorado River never makes it to the Gulf of California anymore. It just dries up in the desert now.
Oh, that's crazy. Oh, we keep asking you questions. Oh, is there a Zoom question? No. Oh, okay. This is. Oh, I won't ask too many questions, but this. Oh no, I got distracted by it. Oh no, okay. This is my question. Since you've been involved in this sort of thing, how do these sort of water negotiations generally take place? Like, is it always like lawsuits, or like what other ways do people communicate about this?
Well, that's a good point. Now, sometimes they'll form like committees, like in the ACF, they actually formed a committee of stakeholders, and they all got together and they tried to work it out. Said, hey, you know, we could give up this, or we absolutely have to have this, and they all talked and worked together, and actually came up with some plans. And of course, did the legislators listen to them? So,
I have a very common question. In 2010, the United States government released a report saying that by 2030, the water wars will start. Do you think the United States is currently doing anything to?
yes, good. Yes.
say something. I'll say something in that. Okay. Data center issues. There's too many to go through, and it's late and it's Friday night. But I feel this is annoying. But we can always make more electricity. Water's a finite resource, and so when these data centers are going into towns, first they think about the electricity, and then they freak out because they make this deal, and then they go to the water utility, and like you said, it's a very regulated, right? Like each town gets X number of mega gallons per day, and like all this stuff all the way down the rivers, and then if a data center comes in and it's going to take like 50% of that allotment, like what happens? And so that's really where the water issues are coming in on the data centers right now, is the public water works are like, wait, what? So something's got to give, I guess, is really, because we're not going to change the state line to the Tennessee. So if that's our long-term plan, I'm very concerned. Like that's not this is, but like there is a resource management like special committee right now in the General Assembly, and they are looking exactly at that. And a legislator actually was like, hey, we've done a really good job at regulating and sharing among crops and cities, and he's like, what we don't have right now, because we never thought of doing it, and what we need to do now is do the same sort of long-term planning around industry and who gets water. Yeah. So that's what's going to start happening. Maybe. Hopefully. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Any other questions?
You mentioned the Colorado River. Didn't we screw Mexico over in the 1944 deal, where we basically said we would give 1.5 million gallons per day, per month? I don't know. But I heard allegedly we send them back salt water and dirty water back to Mexico, where we get a lot of the water from the Colorado River.
No, it doesn't surprise me. I don't know the specifics of that, but it doesn't surprise me at all. But more recently, they are trying to maybe deals with Mexico about that. But you're right that in the past, I'm not surprised at all that they would have done that. Like I said, the river doesn't make it to Mexico. It dries up before it gets, or once it crosses the border and gets into Baja, it dries up.
I vaguely remember, it may have been Huntington family, some industrialists at the time. They were essentially growing cotton along that area, and by the time it got to Mexico, it was dried up completely. And Mexico was complaining, so, oh, well, hey, we got all this cotton now, it's good.
All right. Well, thank you, John. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And yeah, we'll see you at our next event.
We're going to see John at the next event. It's going to happen.